Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second session of our Flock Talk series in partnership with Russell Feeds. With us tonight is Dr. Gregory Archer, who is a professor and extension specialist in our Texas A&M AgriLife Poultry Science Department. Just to cover a few things tonight, this meeting is being recorded. And it will be posted on the Tarrant County AgriLife YouTube page at a later time. The way you can go back and review the information. We do ask that you keep your mics muted just to help with the background noise. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and I will relay those to Dr. Archer throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, I will be posting a link in the chat box for a quick survey. If you would fill that out for us at the end, we would greatly appreciate it. That just helps us in terms of our job and in bringing information that is pertinent and relevant to the needs of the community, as well as gives the participants a chance to relay to us in terms of the information or programs that y'all are needing information on. So with that being said, I will turn the program over to Dr. Archer.
Hey, good evening, everybody. As her introduction said, I am a professor and extension specialist in Department of Poultry Science and part of AgriLife Extension. I am currently the only poultry specialist for the state, so I cover the entire state and help our county agents with programming like this. And also, if you have questions, you guys can always directly contact our office. We have a few staff members besides me, but I'm the main PhD, I should say, in our group. So hopefully I can help you guys most of your questions. So tonight we're going to talk about breeds. Initially, I'm going to go over some of the popular breeds that people use for backyard chickens. You may have some of these already. If you haven't gotten some, it may give you some ideas of maybe what may or may not work for you. And then I'll go over some basic nutrition on what the goals of feeding your birds are, what we're trying to do there tonight. So those will be two main categories we'll talk about tonight. Okay, so when we're deciding what kind of bird you want to get for your small flock, backyard chicken, whatever you want to call it, it really depends on the type of production you're looking for. Most people are looking for egg production. Most people want to get a bird that's going to lay them eggs. Some people, we're not going to talk about tonight, may want meat birds like broiler chickens or a bird that are going to grow to eat. And some people want both. Some people they want what we call a dual purpose bird, or a bird that may mainly use for egg laying, but they're big enough. So maybe when they stop laying eggs, you may be able to put them in your soup pot or cook them up or do whatever you want to do instead of just disposing of them another way. So some people may want some of those bigger breeds. The main thing I say when you're looking at what kind of bird you're looking at, you need to look at what you're looking for your expectations of this bird. Are you trying to make a profit? Which I will tell you, most of the time you're not going to make a profit off of having backyard chickens, no matter how many eggs you sell or think you're going to sell. A lot of times you're just lucky to break even. So it reduce your food bill, and a lot of people are probably interested in this because of the whole egg prices right now. It's really even now it's not likely long term that you're going to reduce your food bill because there's a lot of inputs you maybe aren't thinking about when you're raising chickens, like labor and equipment and things like that when you're thinking about how much you're spending on having chickens. But some people may think it's just worth their time. And then the main one I say where you have backyard chickens and what type of bird you're going to get is for your own personal use and your satisfaction. Why? Because you like watching chickens, you like having chickens, you like to feel that satisfaction that you're going out there feeding them and they're making an egg for you to use for your family or to sell to other people. And then the last criteria is basically what do you like? And we're going to kind of get into that because there's so many different types of chickens out there, kind of like dogs. You're really going to get the kind of chicken that you like, or maybe a few types of chickens that you like, and that's where we're going to end up with that. So usually I start with this. So chickens all came from the red jungle fowl. Those are still out there in the world today. They're not gone and extinct or anything. They live in the jungles of Southeast Asia. They weigh about 2 pounds. They lay a total of about 10 to 12 eggs per breeding season. So that's only 10, 12 eggs a year that these chickens lay. Not very many eggs, but we've took those birds over many years, and bred them to become some of the more popular things. So this is the most prolific egg layer we have is a white leghorn, like foghorn leghorn from the old cartoons. Most commercial white egg layers are going to be these birds. They lay a little bit more than a jungle fowl. Especially the roosters are going to be much bigger than a jungle fowl rooster. They lay close to 280 to 300 eggs a year, so they're laying almost an egg a day compared to the 10 to 12 eggs a year. Their feed conversion, so they are going to lay for every 2 pounds, and this is actually better now. About 2 pounds of feed, you're going to get about 1 pound of eggs out of them. So they're really good conversion there. These birds obviously would never give you that because you're only laying 10 eggs a year. And then if you look at the meat birds, that's the other way we selected a way, just to kind of show you this. An average bird is growing to 6 to 7 pounds for like a whole bird that you're going to buy in the grocery store. You're buying a whole chicken carcass. And those are usually about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the type of production they're in. And then their conversion is about a little less than 2 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of growth. So if you look at that and we do your math there, you're getting 12 pounds of feed is going to give you a 6 pound chicken. So it's not very much feed that you're feeding this bird from birth to 6 weeks to actually get it to be full grown for processing. But again, that is all done naturally. This is by genetic selection. Just in case you ever hear that or see on packaging out there, no hormones used. It's illegal to feed chickens hormones. It's a federal law. We can't feed them hormones. People just put that on packaging because companies are marketing against each other and they think, oh, if I put that on the packaging, someone's going to think that my chickens are hormone free, where these other chickens probably have hormones in them, and that's just not true. There's no hormones to make them grow fast. We don't give them hormones. We don't inject them. They just have been genetically selected to grow super fast and put on a lot of meat. So let's go back to that leghorn that lays a lot of eggs. So when you see stars on here on my little charts, I'm going to show you more stars means something like better egg laying, more meat production, more aggressive, more broody, needs more space. And then I'll have things on here what climate they're on if there's a bantam. When I'm talking about a bantam is basically a mini version of that chicken. So some of the breeds they've created little ones that are about half or less the size of the normal breed. So they do lay eggs still, but there's going to be little tiny eggs comparatively. But some people like to just have a little tiny chicken run around the yard. So some people buy them because they're cute or whatever to run around their yard. But as you can see, this white leghorn is a really good egg producer. They're not so great on meat production because they're pretty skinny birds, but they're kind of middle road. So the most stars you're going to see is 3, and the least is going to be 1 on these charts. The males especially can be kind of aggressive. The females sometimes too. They are not broody. Most of the leghorns have been bred so that they do not sit on eggs. So broodiness means they want to sit on an egg and incubate it and hatch it out. You don't want that in your chickens unless you're trying to hatch out eggs, because that means if they're wanting to sit on your eggs, they're going to sit in there. When you go to collect your eggs, they might be sitting on there and they're going to peck you and fight you to try and keep those eggs. And most of the time, we don't want a lot of broodiness in our chickens unless we're actually going to be doing something where we're one of the incubate eggs. Space needs, they says a lot for these birds. That's because they're pretty flighty. So if you're raising them in your backyard, letting them free range, they're going to need a lot of space as they run around. But if you're conversely, we raise these commercially, and when they're raised in cages, they do really well being in groups, small groups, in a really tight cage, so they don't need a lot of space. But when you let them out of that cage, they want to run around and jump and go crazy, and they're hard to catch and things like that. So you need to give them some space so they don't hurt themselves. And they do it well anywhere. A lot of breeds of chickens will do well anywhere. They will do well in really cold weather, and they'll do really well in hot weather. Chickens can usually adjust to the problems that sometimes they have is when you have quick changes from hot to cold, like we've been having in Texas lately. Sometimes they don't do so well. They get a little stressed going from really hot to really cold and really cold to really or vice versa there. So you gotta maybe manage that a little with sometimes with the chickens, but they can generally, if it's not super cold, they'll be fine. You just have to worry about it. In some places like that aren't going to be necessarily here, if it gets snow on the ground and stuff, they can get frostbite on their feet and their combs and things like that if it gets too cold. And then if it gets super hot, you have to manage it no matter what breed they are. It's going to have to worry about heat stress. Just kind of showing you a white leghorn, how they lay eggs. Generally, is they're going to start laying eggs around 19 weeks of age, and then by about 23, 24 weeks of age, they're going to be in peak production. Means they're going to be laying. This is showing you 90% of a flock is laying eggs So you have most of your chickens laying an egg every day at a white leghorn, and you see they slowly decrease. So by about 79, 80 weeks, they're getting closer down past 70% eggs. And for you in your backyard, that's probably, you may say that's fine. If my chickens are only laying an egg 70% of the time, I don't need that many eggs. But in commercial industry, this has become more economically that becomes not worth having the birds. So they replace the flock and start over again, because economically they want to be up in this area, um, having most of the flock laying. They don't want to be feeding birds who aren't laying eggs every day. But again, with you, that's probably not a big deal. One way around that, even for you, is what we call molting, and they do this commercially. And I'm going to bring this up because molting is a natural phenomenon that if you don't give your birds lighting, they will go into a molt every year when it's wintertime. So what happens is they stop laying eggs, they lose their feathers, or some of their feathers, if not a bunch, they renew their feather coverage, and they'll stop laying eggs until the light changes or something else, and then they'll come back. So this just shows you commercially what they do is they molt them and then they bring them back so that they come back at a higher rate and they can get another laying season out of them and extend them out to over 100 weeks instead of getting rid of the birds at 70 weeks. But if you don't give your birds lighting, they're gonna, as the daylight decreases, they start laying less and less eggs. So when it gets wintertime and it's the shortest days of the year, they may actually stop laying altogether or be ready to lay a few eggs. I get a lot of phone calls from people saying my chickens stopped laying eggs in November. What's going on? Do they have a disease, or do they have some nutrition deficiency? And I'm usually like, did you put a light bulb out there on a timer to keep them at 16 hours a day of light year round? If you want that, then they will lay. The only thing I will say about that is if you don't let them naturally molt, you are decreasing their overall ability to longevity of laying eggs because you're going to make them lay all their eggs much quicker that their body can handle. So if you let them molt, you'll have a flock longer, but you may have time periods where you're not getting eggs from your birds. Another white egg layer. So one way, if you don't realize how to tell what kind of color egg the chicken is going to lay, it's looking at their earlobe. So this is its earlobe right here. This chicken has a white earlobe, so it will lay white eggs. If this is any other color of fleshy color, it's going to lay some type of pigmented egg, so some type of egg with a color. If it is a white earlobe, they lay white eggs. This one doesn't lay as many eggs as a white leghorn, but they are still a pretty good egg layer. As you see, they're less aggressive. They're still not broody. Still have some of the same problems, or not say problems, or some downsides of this breed, like they need a lot of space and things like that. But they will do well anywhere. If you want a white and black speckled chicken, these are a good one. These Anconas. These Minorcas is another white egg layer. Again, you see white earlobe, even though it's a black chicken. They're really good again for egg laying. I should say when I say heat down here, these Minorcas sometimes they say they do well in heat, so they'll handle the heat a little better than some breeds, so that they can actually be okay in Texas. That they don't necessarily do so great sometimes in the colder weather. So down here, this could be a breed that if you can find may do well in the summers a little more. They can handle heat a little bit more than some other breeds. Another one that used to be very popular is the Plymouth Rocks. So these are really good birds for a backyard chicken flock. One, because they are a little bigger. So if you wanted a dual purpose, even though I'm not laying these as dual purpose, these are brown egg layers. As you can see, it's not white right here. It's almost like a blackish earlobe almost. It's a different color. They lay a lot of eggs. This used to be back in the 1950s. Everyone would have a Plymouth Rock in their backyard for laying eggs. This was the most popular breed back in the 1950s. So they are a good chicken for backyard chickens. They're pretty calm, pretty consistent egg layers. Again, nice bird if you want them. They are a little bit bigger birds, so even though if there's any climate, you may have to sometimes in the summer make sure they're not getting too heat stressed, but they usually handle it pretty well. If you wanted be careful when you get them, because another breed that lays brown eggs that looks like these almost is this Dominique breed. But you can see the difference between these two is these ones are a little skinnier, so they're not as good for egg production. But these guys these guys are not broody at all, or these guys are a little more broody. So again, sometimes you're looking at what you want to deal with when you're getting breeds. Do I want to deal with a broody chicken or slightly more broody chicken? But sometimes breeds that look alike, they've selected, okay, we selected for these feathers, but they selected these ones not to be so broody, while these ones are a little bit more broody than the other ones. That kind of also goes when you're looking for a reddish bird like these. These are New Hampshire Reds, really good egg layer, brown egg layer here. These ones, again, are a little bigger, so you can use them for meat production if you eat them if you wanted to, but they're really good egg layers. These ones are not very aggressive, but they are extremely broody. They want to sit on eggs like crazy. But if you want a chicken that kind of looks like this, there are breeds out there. You can then go and say, I want a Rhode Island Red instead of a New Hampshire Red. It's going to do all the same things. So if you look at it, it's going to be not broody at all. Basically, these ones don't really want to sit on eggs. They're not like the other ones. But the trade-off with that is, again, if I go backwards, not very aggressive bird in the New Hampshire Red. The Rhode Island Reds are a little more aggressive. So you have to be, what are you willing to deal with? Are you willing to deal with a little more broodiness to have a little less aggressive bird, or are you willing to deal with a little less aggressive bird to deal with a little less broodiness? So you got to kind of think what you're willing to do with it. But they're both really good birds for backyards. Just they have a little bit different things going on with them. Now this bird is sometimes a very popular bird. It's these marins. They lay a really dark, rich colored egg. They're not as prolific egg layers as some of these other ones. But again, similar qualities. But you see here, they prefer the cold. So I know people who raise these here in Texas and have success, but you got to be careful a little bit with them because they do get a little heat stress. I have a former student. He's actually my first grad student I had 13 years ago. He was raising these birds and selling them and breeding them because the color of the egg, it's almost a maroonish color, and he was trying to select them so he could call them Aggie eggs and sell them as like market them out there as I'm selling Aggie eggs. I told him to be worried about trademark infringement, things like that, but he didn't listen to me. But again, that's one reason people like them is because there's a really dark, rich colored shell and it looks really nice. But again, you got to be careful with some breeds because of the fact that they don't do so hot or do so great in hot weather. And if it's 100 something degrees, you better be putting a fan on these birds to give them some cooling down. Otherwise, they are probably you're going to at least not have egg production, if not lose some birds during the summertime. On the other side of that, you get a bird that has a really dark colored egg, are these Pandesinas, and if you can find them, or Pandesicas, I'm probably saying it wrong. Again, even a better egg layer than those Minorcas, but they do really well in hot weather. They're a good bird down here in Texas. If you can find a hatchery or find a store that's selling them, they do really well in hot weather. They're a little more. They have these bluish colored legs. I mean, they're a good chicken if you're looking for a bird that's going to do well in the hot weather and out here. But again, they do come with a little kind of mid-level broodiness that you have to deal with. A lot of popular people like these. These next two, the Araucanas and the Americanas. These are the green, and then the Americanas are the blue egg layers. A lot of people like them because they lay those kind of blue and green eggs. They come in a lot of different color patterns, as you can see. They're not just one color like some breeds are. The roosters can get pretty big though. This is a rooster here. He's pretty big. They come in different colors. They turn out different colors as well. One thing about them is they have these little poofy cheeks. So they look different. They have some different feather characteristics that people like. They're a good egg layer. They may not lay the biggest eggs. The hens sometimes are a little smaller, so they don't lay as big eggs sometimes as some other breeds. But they are super broody. So that's one thing. Yeah, if you get these, you're gonna have super broody ones. This I have on here that is less aggressive. I should say females, in my experience, are less aggressive. The males, like any rooster, can still be pretty aggressive. And like I said, I've seen some pretty big ones of these. So they can get pretty big, even though the hens are going to be smaller. But they're a popular breed. They lay a lot of eggs. Same thing about the Americanas. I said they come in different colors. They look a bunch of different feather patterns. So you never know what you're going to get unless you know the exact like strain that you have, possibly that what color they're going to come out. But again, they're a really good bird. A lot of people like them because they lay that blue egg. They like getting blue eggs. There's a few other breeds out there that sometimes are called Easter eggers and stuff that lay different color eggs, like the blues, the greens. I've even seen some pink shelled eggs. So there's some other breeds and strains that are raised those, but these are more the popular ones that I'm showing you. If you are looking for a meat bird, most of them are Cornish crosses, Cornish rock crosses, so barred rock and then Cornish cross with them. Like I said, these are more commercial type strains. They come in different colors. This is from one hatchery that I found them. They grow fast. If you're not looking for that and you want a slow growing broiler bird, there's a lot of those on the internet too now, where these birds grow instead of growing in 6 weeks, go 12. I've seen some that they say recommend out that far as 18 weeks. The only difference between this is people think that you're growing them more naturally. You're going to feed them a whole lot more because it's going to take a long time to get to that 5 pounds that you want to get to. They're not going to convert feed as well. But some people think it's more natural and they want these other ones or they want different color looking birds. These are not going to be really, most of these are not going to be good egg layers. If you're getting a broiler bird, one, these are not living very long. And if you're going to try and keep them for a long time, they're not going to lay a lot of good eggs once you get them to be as old as an egg layer would be. These birds, if you try and keep these all the way up, raising an actual broiler breeder all the way to the end, you have to do things like make sure you're monitoring feed intake because they get so big and they start getting leg issues. So I usually tell people not to, it's a lot of work. I wouldn't raise broilers to try and get eggs or reproduce them. I would just buy chicks every year if you wanted to have meat birds. So when we do talk about true dual purpose birds, I'm going to talk about some. Orpington is a really popular breed. These birds are actually really good birds. They're usually pretty calm, do really well with kids. They like if you tame them down, they almost become like little dogs. They'll follow you around. They'll let you pick them up. They'll let you pet them, do things like that. They're usually pretty good. The thing about them is again they're very fluffy birds. So why it does stay up any. I know in Texas when we had those real heat waves and droughts the last couple summers, these birds, some of these have trouble surviving that heat. So you need to think about how you're going to keep them cool because it's a lot of feather coverage. Um, so it's hard for them to cool off sometimes in the summertime, but they are a really good bird. Australoops are another, they're a little bigger dual purpose bird. This is a kind of a larger bird, but they're good for, but they do lay eggs here. Pretty good. They will be do well. But again, any climate for all these dual purpose, but do realize the bigger the chicken you get, the more you have to worry about it in hot weather. So if you have a little leghorn, like I showed you the first one, those are pretty skinny little birds. They'll handle heat like crazy. But some of these other bigger breeds you need to worry about. People love these Cochins because they're cute. They have big poofy tails. They have feathers on their feet. They will do well, but except that sometimes again they need worry about them in hot weather. They do a little better in cold weather. The one thing I'll also say about these guys, you need to make sure your litter quality and your yard does not get super muddy because they have feather on their feet. If that gets all matted up, that gives space for like parasites to get in there. We get fly maggots being laid in parts of that. You want to keep them clean. They can also that can lead to foot problems. Again, they do better if you make sure the ground they're on is pretty dry and they're not going to get that all matted up and caked up with mud. So just be careful if you get any breed with feathers on their feet like this. That can be, but again, these ones are good. And some people, because this is a bantam version, people buy these bantams because then they're even cuter because they're little tiny little things that have little poofy tails and feathers on their feet. They come in all different colors. Should say this one and these come in all different colors. They're not just these orange colors. They come in all types of colors. And some of the colors are relative. If you buy chicks, can be expensive. I've seen some of these Orpington colors. You can buy an Orpington of a certain color, and it costs you $15 a chick, because it's a more rare color. But some people want them, or versus this buff Orpington, which is more a regular kind of popular one. You can get these just at the feed stores. One that I want to point out to you all is this one. I had a talk the other day with AgriLife. They were asking me about backyard chickens for an interview. This one, people see on the internet. They don't necessarily, they think of it, sometimes the videos of it are actually fake. These birds can get super big, depending on how tall you are. Some of these it can be up to your waist. The roosters, they look like mini turkeys. They get really big. People love these on the internet. You can read all over the place, like, oh, this is the greatest bird in the world. I love these birds. They're so fun to have. But, and I've heard people having them in Texas, and you can keep them alive here. But because this bird is so big, they die very easily in Texas during the summer because this is a huge chicken and it produces a lot of body heat. So it needs some way to cool off in the summer here. So if you get these because you want a giant chicken in your yard to run around, be aware that you're going to have to manage that bird during the summertime really well. I don't usually recommend this for down here. I know people like them and love them, but I would get a different breed instead of these. I would get something more like the Catalina or something that handles eat down here really well. They're not as big for meat, but you can get some meat off these birds versus like a leghorn. But they do really well in the heat. So again, another breed that would do well in the heat, where this one does not at all. Of course, you may want any of these breeds. You may want to do. Some people want to get chickens for show beyond just getting egg production because you can show chickens just like dogs. There's all types of crazy chickens and types of hairdos. These are Polish breeds where they have these big poofy feathers on their head. You have some of them with a little mohawk. This one looks more like a jungle fowl, game bird type bird. You get different feather patterns. You can get these lace patterns on their feathers. You can get these ones with big feathers on their feet. This one here is a silky. This is one of the breeds of chicken that its skin is black, its meat is black, its bone is black, all its organs are black. So some people get these because the Asian market out there thinks that these have medicinal purposes with the black chicken meat. So when you eat that chicken meat, they think it has some type of medical benefit to you. One thing about these chickens also that they're used for a lot is these are the most broody chickens, and I think possibly in existence. They use these birds to sit on endangered species eggs. So if they're trying to get some type of species that won't incubate their own eggs, they give it a silkie, and a silkie will basically sit on any egg. So that's one thing. If you do get silkies, they will sit on all your eggs, and you will be trying to get them off the nest of all the other chickens you have. They will be trying to incubate them. But again, you can get whatever type of chicken you want. It's really about what meets your needs and your production goals and how many eggs you want. When we're talking about chickens, one thing to think about when you get chickens is how many eggs do you want and how are you going to use those eggs or sell them or get rid of them. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna get 10 chickens. Well, if you get some of these breeds that lay every day, that means you're getting 10 eggs a day. So almost a dozen eggs a day if you have 10 chickens. So sell almost 7 dozen eggs a week. Are you eating all those eggs? Are you able to sell that many eggs? Think about those kind of things. Maybe you want to get a breed of chicken that only lays eggs every other day, or 3 eggs only lays eggs twice a week, or something like that that you can find out there. And those may meet your needs better than getting one that just lays eggs totally every day, and then you have to go out there and deal with that all the time. But again, just kind of think about what you're doing with those eggs, how many eggs you actually need for your family's use or for whatever purposes you're having chickens for. So are there any questions at this point about breeds that I can answer before I move on to nutrition? I'm kind of looking to see if there's anything shoving in the chat for a second here. Nothing?
Nothing in the chat box at this time.
Okay, so we'll move on to basic nutrition here. So again, most people historically, why we chose chickens is to domesticate and make into a breed, a type of animal we were going to raise for farms and agricultural purposes, is because they can efficiently change cereal grains and other feedstuffs into eggs and meat, something that we can use. So we use them for that purpose. But chickens use feed for 2 main purposes: for energy source to maintain their body activity, growth, eating, digestion, all stuff, and then to build material for bone development, to grow meat, to produce eggs. So if you're not feeding them the right diet with the right nutrients, they may decide to grow and maintain their body functions, but not lay any eggs for you. So if you're not giving them optimal nutrition to handle the environment that they're in, they're going to stop laying eggs. And if they're laying too many eggs, they may not have enough calcium or something that can affect their bones, and then they're going to start having leg issues and breaking bones or something like that. So the feed the chicken is made up, meat is made up of the same stuff all of our stuff is. It's made of water, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, minerals, and vitamins. Each one of those things serves a purpose for the bird. I'll go briefly over all that just in case everybody doesn't remember their schooling days. But water is one of the things that most people neglect. Most people don't think about water when they're feeding it. They're like, oh, I'm just going to give them some water. Water carries all the waste products out of your body. It helps cool the bird. It softens the feed so it can better get that food through its digestion. It carries it. And when we think about a baby chick, it's 79% water makes up its body. And as it gets older, that percentage of water changes, but not the need for water. So you need to make sure your birds have good, clean water. Your chick is going to need a constant supply of fresh water to stay healthy. It doesn't drink a lot of water at one time, so it has to drink often. They have to constantly have water. They don't go over and just drink one giant cup of water and be done for the day. They drink little tiny bits all day long. Water, again, is going to make about 65% of an egg. So if you're having hens that are going to lay eggs, they need water because they can't make the egg if they don't have water, because they need that egg is made up of 65% water. So if you don't give them good enough water, you may not see them laying eggs. If they're heat stressed and there's not enough water out there for them to drink, that may be why you're not getting eggs at that point. So you need to make sure water is available at all time. Most of you are going to have like some type of water fountain or trough rather than using an automatic water or drinker. So you need to make sure that you fill your waters not only in the morning, but make sure that they still have water because if you do that, they may drink, depending on the size and the amount of birds, they could drink all that water by mid-afternoon and have no water left for the rest of the day. You need to check on it more than once to make sure they got water, or make sure you have a big enough water trough or water container that it's not going to run out. Because if they do, as I said, it can lower that egg production because the bird will drink about 25% of her daily water intake the 2 hours prior to darkness. So she's drinking 75% of her water throughout the rest of the day, but a quarter of her water is going to come in that last 2 hours before it gets dark out. So they're going to go drink a fair amount of water before they go to sleep. So they need to make sure they have a lot of water at that point. Otherwise, they may not lay eggs for you the next day because they didn't get enough egg water the day before and are dehydrated. So carbohydrates make up the biggest part of any poultry diet. Those are starches, sugar, cellulose. So they're going to form other stuff for body maintenance. Most of our carbohydrates in poultry diets are going to come from the grains like corn or milo or some other grain. But when you feed it that, there's cellulose and other complex carbohydrates that can't be used efficiently by the bird. So we classify those as fiber. If you feed a really high fiber diet, your birds can't digest that. So you need to think about that. If you're trying to make your own feed for some reason, or if you're just feeding stuff on the side, that if you give them too much fiber, they're going to have trouble digesting. It's going to affect their digestibility to digest the rest of the stuff there. Fats, the most chicken feeds are going to have some type of fat. Some of them will have animal fats, but sometimes a lot of people in feeds just now say vegan or vegetarian on them. So your vegetable oils, like a soy oil, is also done a lot. That helps disperse the micronutrients throughout the feed when they're putting that fat in there. It also increases the energy of the feed, so the birds get an energy source from that fat. Small amounts of fat are desirable because it has fatty acids in there, and it also reduces the dust of the feed and improve palatability. Carbohydrates cost less than fats and are easily digestible, so and are transformed into fat. So a lot of times we feed a lot more carbohydrates in a diet than we're going to feed fats. Fats are usually used as just an added source of energy, or as I said, some of these other things on here to help make the feed more palatable. Proteins is the other thing, so that's made up of amino acids that we all need, that animals need for their body's functions, and making tissues in their body to form the albumin. On the tag of your poultry feed is always going to list the amount of crude protein, and there's a certain level you want to feed, and we'll go over that as we get through this. It tells you the percentage of guaranteed. It doesn't tell you the quality of protein that's in that feed. It just says this is a guaranteed amount. A lot of sources of protein out there, again, are animal protein, some, but a lot of them are plant proteins, because soybean meal is probably the most common protein to be used in chicken feed, though other ones can be used. I would kind of usually recommend against using cottonseed meal, especially for egg layers, because it can change the color and taste of your eggs. But trying to use some of these other ones, but sometimes people do feed those chickens. The mineral part of it is also very important, because that's how they're going to get their calcium and phosphorus to build their bones, to build the eggs that they're laying. Grains are really low in minerals, so supplementation, they got to add those to the feed. Sometimes you may have to give your chickens, if you notice that they're not getting a lot, they're laying thin-shelled eggs, you may have to give them substituted sources of calcium, other minerals, or mineral blocks for them, pectin, things like that. If you, for some reason, the stress of their environment is making the feed that you bought not enough for them, they may need some extra sources out in the environment to help them deal with that. But all these other trace minerals are important. Again, we'll go over calcium and limestone here in a minute, but those are the main sources of calcium that we give chickens. Vitamins people don't think about, those are also very important. if your birds are outside, they're going to get vitamin D. If for some reason you were housing your birds inside, you need to make sure your diet has enough vitamin D supplemented into the feed because they need vitamin D from the sunlight. If they don't give them that, you're going to have problems. Um, Again, vitamins must supply because they're not formed by the birds. Most basically, we have two fat soluble and water soluble ones. So the fat solubles are A, D, E, and K that chickens need, and then the water soluble ones you can see there are C, thiamine, riboflavin, iodine, choline, biotin, folic acid, B12, all these other things. So some people want to supplement with vitamins. That's okay. If you think your birds need them more, you need to put extra vitamins in the water or something, you can do that. Um, just be careful you're not over vitamining them, because that sometimes can be a problem too. Again, so this is where we're really getting to the crux of nutrition here. So feeding the right feed to your bird is important. So the type of bird you have. Commercial feeds are going to all have the same main ingredients, but there's different times of life that your bird needs a certain type of feed. Some people, when they first get started, just go out there and buy any old bag of chicken feed and think that's fine. But if you have chicks, you need a certain feed. If you have older birds, you need a certain type of feed. So you need to make sure you're doing it what's right for your flock. You need to know what age they are, what kind of birds you're feeding, because sometimes if you're able to find certain feeds that are actually better for a brown layer because they're bigger birds than a white layer, you may want to feed that. And our birds being raised for meat or eggs also, again, really determines what kind of feed you're giving them. Kind of go over the basic stuff here. So if you're looking at meat birds, you can see their protein levels are slightly higher than these egg layers. A pullet is a egg layer that has not laid an egg. So these are your young birds from 1 to 6 weeks of age, all the way up to from 7 to 18. But you see on here that there's different types of diets. There's a starter diet, and there's a grower diet minimally for laying hen, and then there's an actual laying hen diet once they get to 19 weeks of age. But you can also see their protein levels change. They go down in laying birds and in, honestly, in broilers when they get older. But you can see initially there's not much calcium in these diets. But once they start laying eggs, they need a ton of calcium. You're going from under 1% to over 3, all the way up to 4% of their diet having to be calcium. You need to make sure you're adjusting that, because if you don't and you're feeding a grower feed to your birds that are in layer, they're not getting enough calcium to be able to lay you eggs. You also see somewhat the fat stays about the same, but a meat bird egg has a lot more fat. They need a lot more energy and stuff to grow that muscle. Fiber wise, it's about pretty consistent, but it does change a little bit as birds get older, how much fiber we're putting in those diets. The most common feeding mistakes people do is feeding that wrong diet, where they give a young bird a layer ration because they go out and they buy the layer feed and they think they give that to a chick. Calcium level in that is way too high for a young bird. It's totally going to mess them up. As I just showed you here, if you feed 3% to a bird that's supposed to be getting 1%, you're really doing a bad. You're going to mess their bodies up giving them that much calcium. The other thing do is, and I'm going to go over this in detail here, is they mix scratch grains with their complete ration. So you go out to the feed store and you buy you a 50-pound sack of feed, and then you're like, hey, I'm going to buy some of these scratch grains, and then you mix it in there because you're trying to save money and think, I'm going to dilute it out, or I'm going to feed these scratch grains as like, not just feed them this, I'm going to feed them this too. That'll save me money. It's usually not the best thing, because especially scratch grains, if it's just something like cracked corn that's way too low protein levels, that's all you're feeding, or you're mixing too much into that. Mixing cracked corn with it again can dilute them. Okay, somebody came in late again. The birds will not grow or will lay eggs if they're not they're gonna get sick, and this isn't a disease if they're not getting that balanced thing. They can also start doing behavioral issues like feather picking at each other. They can get lame because you're not giving them enough good nutrients if you dilute out that commercial ration that you bought at the feed store. They get and they can even die. The second most common mistake is that people don't feed enough of the appropriate type of feed. So you go out there and you're like, I'm going to put this much in my feeder. I've heard people doing crazy stuff. They're not your cats and dogs. They don't need to be fed 3 times a day or twice a day. Or you need to make sure that there's enough feed, that there's pretty much always feed in front of your chickens. So they have the opportunity to eat whenever they're hungry. That's going to keep them healthy. It's going to keep them laying eggs. It's going to you don't want to have them run out of feed. And I will say and I'll go over that except for a couple times, and I'll tell you about what those are when you want them to run out of feed. So again, if you're looking at feed consumption, when we're looking at if you're going to get a brown egg layer versus a white egg layer, you see early on when they're chicks, they're eating about the same amount of feed. When you get to that grower phase where they're going from being 7 weeks to 18 weeks, where they're really starting to grow their skeleton and put on meat, brown birds generally are a lot bigger bird, bigger bones, a lot more meat on them. They're going to need, if you did this, over 3 times the amount of feed during that period. So you're looking at feeding like 12 pounds to a bird during that period of time. If it's a white layer versus 46 pounds, and then you see even when they get to be layers for the whole time, you're going to feed them even over that whole 20 something more pounds over the life of this per bird. So you got to think if you're going to have brown egg, you want brown egg layers, you're going to spend a lot more feed than you are white egg layers. So just realize that that's a difference in how much feed you're going to have to try to figure out what you're going to do if you have all these brown egg layers instead of white egg layers. This is just kind of looking at a diet that we make in our farm, just kind of and it's also kind of it's also based on this. So you can kind of see generally a layer diet's going to have, they're going to eat about 100 grams. So if you're trying to figure out how much feed to feed your chicken, you know, it's in grams and sometimes it's paying a budget to do conversion, but each bird is going to probably eat in order to around 100 grams per day. So if you figure that out, how many birds you got, you can kind of figure out, okay, I need to buy this much feed every week or every 2 weeks or every month or whatever in order to have enough feed for my chickens. They're generally going to have about 17% food protein once they're in lay, about this much energy, and as again, so do the amount of calcium, about 3.5 to 4%. Generally, this is a diet we made. I don't suggest trying to make your own diets. I would say it's a lot easier to just go buy a bag of feed. But if someone out there has a mini feed mill and wants to make your own feed or has access, I mean, we use mainly a corn and soybean, and we add things like methionine and lysine, limestone, salt. We have a pre-mix for meals, and we kind of get a little bit higher. Like this is 18%. We have a diet that's a little bit higher in protein. There is some range there. Ours is a little higher. But again, it's about the same. Again, we're feeding a little higher calcium to our birds too, mainly because what we're feeding, this is mainly the white leghorns on our farm. So we're trying to get more calcium because they lay a lot of eggs. But if you have a brown bird or some other bird, you may have to look at it a little different here, and I'll show you that. There are 2 types of feed when you go to the feed store. There are going to be bags that say put pellets, and there are going to be bags that say crumble. The difference between that is a crumble is a broken pellet. They run it through the mill a little more and smash them up. These ones are good for younger birds and sometimes older birds. These ones are really good for older birds. I will say I have personally noticed sometimes you get birds that waste a lot more pellets because they throw them around and they get on the ground and they never eat them. Sometimes they don't waste as much as of these. So you really have to see if your flock, if you're running through a lot of feed of the pellets, try switching the crumbles and see if maybe they don't waste as much feed. But the idea behind a pellet is that they're getting all that in one bite. They're getting all the nutrition. They just have to do a lot more pecks to get the same amount of a crumble. There is also another one called mash. Mash is basically powdered feed. That's before they run it through the mill and make it into a pellet, and then obviously before they pellet crush that up. So there are some advantages and disadvantages to everything as I just mentioned. Pelleted feed is if you can, once your birds are big enough and they don't waste it, is probably the best way to do it. Mash feeds, they can really be dusty, and if they don't get everything ground up in there and there's a big piece of corn in there, they're going to eat that piece of corn and not eat all the other stuff. They can really pick out of a mash what they're eating, and that's why we've kind of people went to feeding pelleted feed because that way the birds don't have a choice. They have to eat the whole diet. They don't get to like just look at it and say, "Oh, that looks tasty," like that. It's kind of like if giving you the choice to go at a restaurant where you can just choose out of a bar, like I want this, that, whatever, and you don't eat all the healthy stuff for you. Maybe you pick all the stuff that's not the best healthy for you instead. But with a pellet, you have to eat the whole bar to get to choose. So this is the back of just a general. I just picked up Purina Layana crumbles. This is a layer ration. See, there's 16% protein in this one. One thing I want to talk about, if I guess I don't talk about it later, a lot of people want to feed probiotics to their chickens. They want to buy those little packets you can buy at the feed store and mix in water and feed your probiotics to your chicken. Those are sometimes good if you've given antibiotics to your birds or something, and you want to make their guts. But if your chickens don't have anything going wrong, them probiotics aren't really needed, just like they are with us. But the one thing I will say, look at your feed that you're feeding them. If it has something like this, total microorganisms, and it lists here the different types, these are probiotics. So this feed, like a lot of feeds nowadays, already have probiotics in them. So you may already be every day feeding your chickens probiotics. So there's no need to go buy this extra probiotic because you're already giving them probiotics every day. So as long as they're eating their feed, they're getting probiotics. This one also has a phytase. So this is an enzyme that helps break down some of that fiber I was talking about. Um, if you're given a little higher fiber diet. One thing that came out of, before I forget to say this too, I think it was last year, the year before, people were saying Tractor Supply was selling, changed their diet, and that's why people's birds weren't laying eggs. There's no evidence of that. Most likely, what happened is feed costs went up. They did change their diet. They might have been feeding a little less corn, a little more some other cheaper grain, but they're all formulating for the same diet here. So nutritionally, it's the same. They just may be getting a different source for that. So feeding it again, you want to. This is what would be intended to feed a whole. We're feeding you, but you want to feed that sole ration to your hens for 18 weeks of age throughout laying cycle. And again, this is what it says on the back of this feed thing, or if you go on their website, it says this stuff this diet can be fed to adult female chicken, such as what type of chicken. But again, they also say make sure you get clean water. Consumption is going to vary during time of year, so they may eat more or less of this depending on and also what other feed sources you have there. So I mentioned scratch grains or other grains. Some people want to buy these because they're much cheaper. Like you get a 50-pound bag for $13. This is probably an old price; it's probably different now. Um, but one thing when you look at this, to look at is the crude protein. We're talking about feeding a 16 or 18% crude protein to your laying hens. This only has 11%. You don't want to just feed this because not enough protein. Again, it says 16% on that Purina label. The other thing it says, if you look down here, it says feed to adult chickens, geese, turkeys to encourage natural pecking and feeding instincts. Scratch grain is a supplement, not a complete feed. Don't more than 10% of your bird's diet. So you can give this as a little like, hey, I want to walk in my backyard and throw some stuff at them and get my chickens to run around me and come peck. But you don't want to give them too much of this because it's not a full diet. You don't want to be at more than 10% of what they're eating. So if you want to do this a little, you can do that. But if you can also do that with regular feed, you can get a handful of your feed and just throw it out there, and they're all going to come around and pick that up too. Just costs you a little more costly than buying this cheap stuff to use that for that. But don't mix too much of this stuff. Don't feed a lot of scratch grains. I don't even think scratch grains are needed. The other thing people will ask is about grit. You don't need grit if your chickens are free ranging because they are going to eat rocks. They're going to eat little pebbles, eat things, and that's what the grit is. You don't need to feed it. The only reason you need to feed grit is if you were giving whole corn to them too. If you're feeding a pellet, you don't need it because that's the reason. The whole point of a pellet or a crumble is that it's been processed already by a feed mill, so it's easy for them to break their bodies to break down. They don't need to have a rock in there, mash it around, and to break it down even more like you would a whole piece of corn. The only reason you would really need to feed them grit or make sure they have grit if you're not letting free range and you're feeding them like whole corn or cracked corn, and they need that to be able to break that down. Talk about calcium sources. I mentioned limestone and oyster shells are the main one people get. They both have the same amount of calcium in them. We do regard oyster shell as more of an insoluble, slow release form. It's going to stay in the digestive tract longer. Limestone, depending on how big particle size, I've seen it's a bigger particle size, almost the same as an oyster shell, all the way down to this fine powder. It's going to be more of a soluble. It's going to basically go through their bodies really fast. So I recommend using oyster shell more, especially if you're supplementing them and giving them free choice oyster calcium source. Give them oyster shell, limestone, unless it's a large particle. It's going to go in and out of their body really fast. So you don't want to use that. And you can either one, but this stuff, like I said, is really powdery versus this stuff's going to be a little more particle size. Again, 50% of it should be large particle. If you are feeding it anyway, you have at least 50% calcium that's in large particle. You don't want to use this powdery stuff here and make it more than 50% of their diet. Other people think, oh, what do I need all this nutrition for? Because we can just let them out in the grass. They're going to get it. They will get some nutrition from eating your grass. This is showing you a picture of that from an old book we got. But because all the vitamin requirements are taken care of when birds have good green young tender grass. Do you have good green young tender grass out in your yard right now? I don't. Do you have it in the middle of summer? I don't. So don't rely on this to give them all the nutrition, but just, you got to make sure you're giving them good feed and making sure that if you want eggs and you want to be healthy, don't just think they're going to be out there. Because that's also in this book. It says, and this is a book from 1951. It says in there, unfortunately, suitable range is generally unavailable during the spring and early summer months. So just what I said, a lot of times it's not out there, especially here in Texas. So if it's not going to be young, tender green grass, they're not going to get much nutrition out of it. We talk about pigmented yolk. If you want really dark orange yolks, you need to feed these things called xanthophylls. So corn has a decent amount in it. That's why when most chickens lay orange or yellowish yolks, if you don't give them xanthophylls, you can actually get white yolks. One good way to get them would be really dark orange is to feed them marigold petals, and a lot of feed bags will actually say marigold petals added or something into that feed, so you get really dark yolks. There's no nutritional difference between these two yolks, a white yolk and a dark orange one. Yet xanthophylls don't make them more nutrition or not. It's basically just a pigment that causes it to be oranger or whiter. Obviously, it's more aesthetically pleasing for a lot of people to have this color yolk than to eat a white yolk. But again, it's the same nutrition. I talked about feeding. If you have pullets, you're starting from chicks. You want to feed them a starter feed. Something like most starter feeds are going to be in this percentage. And then there's a grower. If you can find a pre-lay, that's fine. If you can't, you just keep them on the grower until they get to the lay. But for these last 2 weeks before they start laying eggs, if you can find a pre-lay in like a feed store, do that. One thing people ask about starters is everybody worried about antibiotics, and they don't want to feed the medicated starter feed. Most medicated starter feeds, when you get them, have basically the medication that's in them is an anti-coccidia, the coccidiostat of some form. I say feed your baby chicks a medicated starter. That is my opinion. It's not going to, because by the time you start getting eggs out of them, that's 10 weeks later or more, 20 weeks later, or 15 weeks later. That's not going to still be in their system. But coccidia, if they get coccidiosis, which usually happens around 3 to 4 weeks of age, it is going to kill your chicks like crazy. It's a parasite that they get. It's better just to feed that medicated feed and make sure your chicks are healthy, and they're going to get to the part where you can start getting eggs out of them. It's not, and coccidiostats are not human used antibiotics. If we ate most coccidiostats, we would get sick or die. So we don't use them in human medication. So it's not, you don't have to worry about antibiotic resistance or any of that stuff or that kind of stuff. I would feed a medicated starter to my birds if I was raising birds. It's going to keep them healthier. You're going to have more chance of having them get to the grower phase and then the lay phase. Because if they get coccidia without it, they're going to die. Again, this is showing you brown eggs layers. If you do have brown egg layers, sometimes there's a little more differences. You see the differences. Mainly, it's going to be in protein and calcium levels versus a white egg layer. By the way, I can share this PowerPoint with I can email it later, and then everybody can get it to download if they want. The chat question: the chickens be vaccinated? Should you? Yes, because they're vaccinated for something that's not most likely going to be covered by that medicated feed. The medicated feeds, like I said, are coccidiosis. Most of the time, you're getting them vaccinated. If there is a coccidia vaccine that sometimes some hatcheries spray, but that's more commercial stuff. If they do get a coccidia vaccine, you probably don't necessarily need, but sometimes actually commercially they do both, just to double whammy it so you don't get coccidia. But you have to do it in a certain way, because if they get vaccinated, some of those vaccines are actually live oocytes that the birds are getting. So if you are feeding a coccidiostat at the same time, they're getting a live vaccine for coccidiosis. You may be killing off the vaccine, so you're wasting your time. But most vaccines you get from hatcheries there are things like Merrick's, and I'll go over that when we do the health talk. I think that's not next time. It's next time or the time after that we're doing the health talk. I'll go over that kind of vaccine stuff and what to do with that. Again, feeder management and water management. You need to make sure
I have a question.
Yes.
What if a chick what if chicks have been vaccinated? Do we still need to feed the medicated starter?
Well, that's what I was trying to say there. I saw that chat question.
Okay.
Most of the time it is not needed. I mean, most of the time the medicated feed is not for the same thing as the vaccination is. It really depends on what you're vaccinating for. Most of the medicated feed is actually not antibiotics. It's actually, like I said, for coccidiosis. It's not actually like trying to do anything else for them except that one parasite they can get. you gotta give them, make sure they're feeding water. You gotta have good area. We sometimes start birds when they're chicks on like little egg flats or something else so that they can get in them because sometimes those feeders have really tall lips on them and they're hard for the baby chicks to get for the first few days, learn how to get in there and get feed out. So unless you have a smaller feeder, um, it takes about a week to learn how to eat that. Fresh feed should be around at all time. Avoiding wasting feed. You don't fill the troughs more than half full if you're using troughs because they're going to throw it out on the ground. You don't want to have them over so they can just waste feed. There's enough feeder space available for all the chickens to eat at the same time, even though they're not going to. You need to make sure they have enough room so they don't fight over who gets to eat. It's important, again, how you handle it. Nutrients can destroy if you hold your feed too long. Fats can get rancid if you have feed just sitting around forever. Vitamins get inactivated. You get mold is a big problem. You don't want mold growing in your feed. Don't feed moldy feed. If your feed has got mold on it, throw it out and get new feed. You want to have good high quality, stored in a rodent-proof container, off the ground so the rodents can't get into it. Store feed in, again, non-metal containers if you can, because metal, if you're letting the feed touch the metal, it increases the chance of the feed becoming rancid and it also destroys the vitamins. So put it in a plastic container of some sort or a lined container. Don't let it touch the metal. Poultry feed should be fresh as possible. So generally, you don't want to store your feed for more than 1 month in the summer and 2 months in the winter. So you should only buy in the summertime enough feed if you're going to buy in bulk to feed your chickens in 1 month. And in the summer you can get it, or the winter you can get away with two. But I wouldn't buy two usually. I just buy 1 month at a time or less. So you do that with your feed doesn't go bad. You don't want them getting eat multi feed because that's toxins are producing there and that's going to kill your chickens. You want to, well, I was talking about letting your feeders not be empty ever. This is the one time I would say at least once a week, let your feeders go empty. Let your chickens eat the entire thing down to the bottom. No feed left in there once a week so that your feed doesn't get caked up in there. It allows you to get rid of it. It doesn't, so there's no old feed that accumulates and becomes moldy in the feeder itself. Let them do that once a week, and then that'll be okay. Just don't let it go all the time with no feed. Again, nutrition is the most important thing for their growth, laying eggs, their health. So common sense is also going to be important for them to be healthy and well fed. So just make sure you're using common sense, things like making sure they got feed, you're feeding that fresh feed, all that stuff. And if you have questions about stuff, send me questions, ask your county agent. But making sure also, I said about fresh feed, when you go to the feed store or wherever you're buying feed, because I know now everywhere apparently sells chicken feed. You can buy chicken feed at Lowe's now and other stores now, Walmart and places. Look at the tag on the bag and see the mill by date, because sometimes feed sits on shelves in places that doesn't sell feed very often for a very long time, and you don't want to feed old feed. You want the freshest feed you can get. So look and see what the freshest feed. Don't take just whatever feed's there because it may be really old, and by the time you get home and open it up, it's super moldy and it's not very good for your chickens. If your birds stop eating, look what's happening to them. See if they're too hot. See if they're too cold. See if there's some other stressor going on, because if they're not eating, it's usually something in the environment. They could be sick, and we'll talk about sickness and stuff, but look first at the environment and see what's going on. Usually chickens during the summertime will go off feed and water, or go off feed a lot sooner because they're hot. Because when, like with us, if you eat, your metabolism increases, and that means body heat gets generated. So what's the easiest way not to make your body produce body heat? Not eat, because then you're not producing metabolism. So they go off feed, stop producing internal heat because it's so hot outside. So just make sure they got water, and then hopefully they'll start cooling down and coming back into it and eating. So that's it on that. I'm done for today. If anybody has questions, I'll take more now. If not, I know that was fast and sometimes a lot of information there. And I talk fast, sorry. I'm not a native Texan. I'm from the East Coast. Unfortunately, I sometimes talk really fast.
So if anybody has any questions, you feel free to place them in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
And if not, and you think of them later, you can find my email on our website, and you can always say, "Oh, there's a chat question." Oh no, that's your stuff. Never mind. I'll put here in the chat in case you ever have questions. I can put it up here. This is my email. So if you ever have a question about poultry, you can always send me an email there. If you think of something later, I'll try and help you. If I don't know the answer, I'll try and point you in the direction someone does, or I'll just tell you I don't know that answer because I know a lot about chickens, but don't know everything, unfortunately.
I did place that link in the chat to this quick survey that I talked about at the beginning of the program. If there are not any questions, we can go ahead and conclude tonight's program. Our next program will be Thursday at 6, same time. I will be sending out the link to the Zoom meeting that afternoon. That way it's in everybody's email and it's convenient for you to find. Our next topic is selling eggs, poultry, and food safety. Again, that will be Thursday at 6. So with that being said, if there are not any questions, we'll go ahead and conclude and we will see y'all here again Thursday night at 6.